Today, we are going to be talking a little bit about how to make these things work. It's absolutely incredibly. How can we make these projects, virtual production, massive all around the world? How can we make it with international standards? We are going to be talking about color. We are going to be talking about every single thing that you need in order to have world standards of projects. But before we start, I want to show a few of the videos that our customers with Eyoto do all around the world, specifically in APAC. There is so much happening in the future, and Brompton is fully committed to ensure that we are in the latest innovations, and we're going to be discussing this in a little bit of time. But first, let's see all these projects that are happening with Brompton and Eyoto. So, what is all this? What are we achieving in here? Virtual production has come to the film industry to change the way things are done. It is an incredible tool that just gives flexibility to creatives. And what are we trying to do? Where are we going? Or to start, who is Brompton? Brompton is a LED processing company. We are driving these panels in here by having an input into our processor that transforms this color to be sent to the LED panels. And why this is important? Well, this year, actually, we are very proud that we received an Emmy for our efforts and for being involved with some of the biggest projects all around the world. And where does this LED processing sit? So we are proudly at the very end of the chain. We are taking all this input content, all the efforts of the creatives, and we are making sure that it looks incredible in camera. Now, as you can see, virtual production is an extremely complex system. This is the simplest way of representing what virtual production can do. In here, you will have these guys in this case. We have our camera or red Komodo, our tracking that is happening with the bolt. All these elements have to speak to each other, and making sure that we are as committed to be as realistic as possible is very important. So we have a big responsibility to make these things happen. And why people choose Brompton? Why has Brompton been part of all these massive projects around the world? Well, first things first is perfect color. That has been a huge commitment for Brompton to make sure that the color that is being sent to the LED processor, the color that needs to be sent to the panels, is going to be as accurate as possible. To do that, we developed a complete new workflow that includes HDR. We can have control over 3D LUTs, things that in cinema are very important because all these colorists, DOPs, they will want to have their tools in order to get the color that they are looking for. We can do real-time color space changes. So you have full control over the color that is going to the output. And then we have other tools in order to do small modifications so it can be as accurate as possible. All this is possible thanks to the Hydra. The Hydra is a calibration system that was developed by Brompton to ensure that we can make the most out of every single pixel of every LED panel. And that's what we do when we work with AOTO. AOTO will have in their factory one of these cameras, and everything will be calibrated to ensure that it will look exactly how it is meant to be. And why color is so important? Because in virtual production, what we are trying to achieve is to recreate reality. Recreating reality, recreating the real world, is such a complex activity because you have to give the best experience to your audience. If any of you saw this VFX happening in the 80s, 90s, where things still weren't perfect, you can realize that sometimes, something doesn't look absolutely correct, and in that moment, you are lost from the experience. At that point, you will start only paying attention to all these small mistakes, and we have to avoid that, and color is a huge part of it. But once we got our new calibration system and the color was looking great, we realized that in the low brightness, these panels might not look exactly how they should. This is very normal. This happens with every single panel. But by adding a couple of tools, we made something that can have a lot of banding to have a better gradient. Also, by adding a tool like extended bit depth in this case, we can recover a lot of detail of what is happening in the lowest brightness areas of your content. This is extremely important because, as I said before, cinematographers work really hard to have the best content in these areas. The creative experience extends to those parts of the content. So improving the quality is very, very important. As well, at low brightness, you can see how there is some color shifts in the panels. That happens because of the way electronics work, and I don't want to get into it, no worries. But the red, green, and blue will react differently to very low brightness panels. How do you improve that? We have a tool called PureTone that will ensure that you have the perfect gradients, exactly what the creators made. Just a very quick example of the reason. As we can see, at high brightness, everything reacts the same way, so calibration is going to work perfectly. But as we go down, we can see how these pixels will have a different distribution, meaning they will react differently to different brightness. And that is the difference. If we look at in a gradient, you have on top how the blue is taking control over the lower area of the content, while with PureTone, you can see it better. It is just tools so creatives and operators can show the best content. Next, again, we are talking about virtual production. There is two things that are common in every single virtual production space when we are talking about extended reality: your camera and the LED panels. For anyone who ever put a camera in front of a TV, you know that cameras and LED panels don't work very well together. You can see blinking, you can see horizontal banding, you can see many different artifacts that are not expected to be there. So for us, it was extremely important to release a feature like Shutter Sync. Shutter Sync works with a very easy interface, and you can just place what is the shutter angle. You have the panels synchronized with your camera, and you can remove artifacts just with a viewmeter. I do remember a situation in which I was in a stage without Brompton. We had these issues, and it took us over 3 days to fix the problem. So things like this are going to really change the experience of creating and shooting on a stage. And that is important because every single scene can have difficult areas that will need to be captured properly. So we have been working very hard to have the best color, to have the best performance in low brightness, and to have the best image in camera. But what is next? This is something that a lot of people is asking a lot about lately. Roger just yesterday asked what is coming in the next 5 to 10 years. I can say what is coming today. what is already happening in order to improve the way video and storytelling is going to be in the future? Well, the first thing that we needed in order to make something new, we needed a new platform. Technology is evolving very, very fast. So we had to develop the strongest receiver card ever made. This receiver card is 20 times more powerful than any receiver card right now in the market. That actually is the previous Brompton receiver card that is in every single panel. Now, this doesn't mean that it's going to achieve new things on these panels, because calibration is already taking the most they can out of every single pixel. But what about these new technologies that are coming up? What are they? So with 20 times the power, we can do up to 1 million pixels per panel. 1 million pixels means that each of these panels, if you had a panel that was massive, so if you have a panel that is 1 meter by 50 centimeters, that will be a 0.7 pixel pitch. 0.7 pixel pitch is getting into extremely fine definitions. And that you can use it, obviously, as a larger display and achieve the highest number of pixels possible just with one panel. You can drive up to 1,000 FPS. Now, big disclaimer, 1,000 FPS is not possible with the chips that we have today, but when they happen, it will be huge. This is actually especially important for us because all these tools that you have seen before, shutter sync, extended bit depth, all these ways of improving the image actually are working inside the frequency. We are sending information between frame and frame. So you want the maximum speed possible in order to send the maximum amount of information possible to get the best quality you can. And because we are talking about a very high amount of pixels and a very high FPS, you need much bigger bandwidth, and that's why it has fiber optic cables to the card straight away, up to 10 gigabits. As I said, if you had a 1 meter by 50 centimeters panel, that will be a 1280 by 720, and a small display in your single LED panel. For all of you that have been in Votion or that have seen an LED volume, LEDs in these new technologies, in all these new places where LED is getting to be, is everywhere. You have it in your ceiling, you have it in your floor, you have it in the background. What does it mean that it is everywhere? By having LED everywhere, it starts acting not only as a source of video, but as well as a source of lighting. And that is actually very important, because when you use LED as a source of lighting, suddenly things don't look completely great. We have very strong magenta shifts in your skins, and that disconnects the background on the foreground. You can see that there is 2 layers between the actors or the foreground elements and the background or the virtual environments. And that's completely normal. Actually, this happens because the panels are in RGB, and RGB is how you want them to be for direct view. If you look directly at the panels, you have RGB, and the human eye, watches in RGB as well. That only means that if you receive green and red at the same time to your eye, your brain will recognize it as orange. This is how humans work. But as we have said, it doesn't look very well in bouncing on the screen, on the skin. The main reason why it doesn't work is because we have a big gap of energy in the middle between green and red. Human skin is an orangish color, and even though we can see this green and red, it doesn't have green or red elements. So it shifts the color and it looks different. And for that, we have developed TrueLight. TrueLight was one of the technologies that is enabled by this new receiver card that can do RGBW. And with TrueLight, what we are doing is we are controlling panels with extra emitters. Now, many of you will have heard of RGBW. So this is exactly what we are doing, controlling the extra W. And the difference is that in a space in which we had big gaps, now we have a flatter color spectrum. Don't get me wrong, this is exactly what you want in an RGB panel, because the thin spectrum of the red, green, and blue just means that it's being very saturated. The more saturated the spectrum, the bigger the color gamut. But by adding an extra emitter, you can achieve that and as well have a better spectrum of light, so all the reflections will look correct. And that's the difference. While on the left, this is RGB, of course, you can see that the foreground person is looking very red, so it's not connecting with the background. We have a much higher quality on the right. By adding this extra emitter and having exactly the same calibration with the previous camera that I was talking about, the Hydra, you will have a better exposure. Why is this important? Because when you go to a shooting, lighting guys, they have to be compensating to avoid this. This is not going to work when you are in the post-production, and to try to fix it in post-production is going to take a lot of time. So usually what happens is that with light, you try to compensate this effect. But if we are starting with something like that, if you are starting with something that is a lot more accurate and look at that like real life, then you can use your light for creative purposes and get a better experience. So this is all. I obviously couldn't leave. Well, this is possible due to the G1 card and the Hydra calibration. And it happens with every skin tone. But I couldn't leave without talking about the next generation of processors. We have a new platform coming up very soon. And for Brompton, this is a lot. We don't really release processors all the time. We release it when something big is happening. Our next generation of processors are including all these new technologies that are today taking over the industry. So it will have bigger amount of pixels, up to 8K. You can get 4x4 inputs, 4x4K inputs. It will drive video over IP. So 2110 and IPMX will be one of the options. And these are important because it offers flexible aspect ratios. You have ultra wide or ultra high to fit your setup. Now, if we look at any single setup for a live concert, for a virtual production studio, anything where LED is involved, the aspect ratios are usually not the standard ones. So instead of wasting space, especially for virtual production, every single pixel that you create is a pixel that has to be processed. So if we can reduce the amount of pixels created and use them at 100% performance, we will optimize workflows by using these technologies. So this is us. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you.